Welcome to the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. I'm Valerie Ferraro, former chair of the Global Risk Committee, and I'll be your host for today's episode alongside my fellow Risk Committee colleagues, Craig Collins and Dr. Kate O'Reilly.
So maybe if you two kind of introduce yourselves, give a little bit about your overview, and we can kind of talk about how we're positioned to talk about the challenges and the kind of the diverse aspects of women's business travel.
Well, I will go. My name is Craig Collins. Thank you very much, Val. I head up the client management team for the Americas for a visa and passport company and have been involved in the travel industry for many, many years now. Kate?
Thanks, Craig. Yep, I'm Kate. I'm a doctor, GP by background, but I work for a leading medical and security risk company and also look after their training for preparing business travellers when they're preparing for their trips.
And I work in the nonprofit space. I have overseen sort of for nonprofits who work globally. So I've always kind of had sort of under the umbrella, sort of the oversight of a managed global travel program, and more specifically, the travelers who are representing and our organizations that are traveling internationally. So to kind of kick it off and get started, I think the most important thing that we wanted to kind of clarify and talk about was that we recognize that there's no one size fits all. There's no sort of silver bullet approach to talking about specifically demographics in travelers, right? We recognize that different traveler demographics have different needs, and they vary greatly across the globe, where they're traveling, when they're traveling. And that might even be at different parts in their life or different times in their life when they're traveling. So there is no one size fits all. Everything that we're about to talk about today, it really kind of varies depending on the individual, depending on the place, and depending on what's happening in the world. So let's kind of kick it off. I think the most important part, and something that we kind of talked about as we were kind of noodling on how to form this conversation, was probably the most important thing we do is really kind of knowing where you're going and doing the research. So maybe, Craig, I'm going to throw this over to you because this is really kind of what your organization, you do. Well, actually, in fact, the two of you, this is the kind of information that both of your organizations really help supply to travelers as they're doing the research and they're getting started on planning it for a trip.
Right, absolutely. Thanks, Val. And, what we do here is obviously you got to make sure that you plan accordingly for the proper documentation when you're going to certain different countries, right? You gotta have to make sure that you have the proper documentation to get into that country. It's kind of funny because a lot of times people think that they need to book their air or their hotel first. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But the reality of it is if you don't have the proper documentation, you're not getting into that country regardless, right? Because you're going to be denied before at the airport, right? So it really does make a difference where you're going to go. And I think especially you want to make sure that you take advantage of this and look at that so that's what we do on our side. Kate?
Yeah, and I think this preparation piece that you've already alluded to, Craig, is key. Doing your research and being prepared is something that everyone should do prior to every trip. And it varies. If you're going on a short trip, somewhere not too far, you've been before, it's very familiar. Actually, the amount of research and preparation you're going to do is quite minimal. Whereas, for an extended trip or somewhere you've not been before, maybe they speak a different language. Maybe the medical care is very different. What's the standard of medical care? If I get sick in this country, what am I going to do? Who am I going to contact? Will I be okay getting the medical care there? It's all these little questions. And the more you research and understand about the country you're visiting or countries, depending on your trip, the better your preparation and the more research you've done, the more prepared you are. Not everyone travels and something terrible goes wrong, but if something does go wrong, you're in a much better place to deal with it, having done your preparation. Val, I'll hand back to you because obviously lots of pieces in that we can continue to talk about.
Sure. Well, and I think since we are kind of focusing on um, women travelers, female travelers, I think we we would not be doing it justice if we didn't talk about the reality that laws are different. Laws for women are different in different countries. Customs are different. Um, Safety elements are different for women in these countries. So I think one of the things when we're doing our research, and this is exactly why I think as travel managers and as travelers, we look to your organizations to kind of find out about what those customs are, what those laws are, what are the, maybe, one of the things that's probably most important is to find out, like, and this is sort of the kind of negative side to it, but like, what aren't you allowed to do? So
Right.
once you can figure out what you're not allowed to do or what could really get you in trouble, then you can kind of start to refine, okay, how am I going to travel? And I think that, kind of understanding, particularly for women, that, as an American woman, there are a lot of things that I know that I'm able to do in my own country and in a lot of countries that I'm not allowed to do in some of the countries that my organization works in. So, Craig, do you see a lot of that when you're dealing with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think research is the key here, right? It is the responsibility of the traveler to make sure that they do the proper research, because to your point, every culture has its different norms, and what we may do here in the US maybe completely do something they may do something completely different in another portion of the world, right? And so it's so important that they do their due diligence and research. And I think from a traveler manager's perspective too, it's also to make sure that you do the due diligence for your traveler, to make sure that every traveler feels safe and knows what they're going into, right? Because they may not, they may not know, but as part of being a travel manager, it's part of your responsibility to make sure that you put that information out there, to give them the ability to be able to research that and to discover, what maybe they can't do, as you said, Val, versus what they can do in that particular country. It is so important that they go in with both eyes wide open, especially when they're going to a region that they may never have gone to before.
Yeah, and I think, Craig, to your point, I think one of these areas is particularly is traveling with medication. So, if you're on specific medication, do your research. Are you allowed to take that medication into the country? If you run out or you lose your medication, can you get the medication while you're there?
Yeah.
Often we say to people, take a copy of your prescription with you, because sometimes it's as easy as, I've forgotten my medication. I know what I was taking. Can you please replace it? But there are countries where the medication you're on isn't available, or, they won't dispense it. So all those things, that prior preparation, like you say, and knowing where you're going and what the laws are around the different things. So, like we said, medication is really important, and can just raising the issue of something that you think, I take a medication at home and it's all fine, and asking for it in a country where that medication may be banned is not what you want to do. And so, one, doing that research so you know what you can and can't do in terms of medication, Craig, you've already said, but then knowing who to reach out to should you need help with medication while you're away is also really important.
Yeah, and I think, Kate, you kind of dove right into that sort of for individuals who do take medications or who are reliant on medications or might just find themselves in a position where they need one while they're in country. I think it's so funny because I think of all of the kind of over-the-counter things that some of us are accustomed to that might just not be over the counter where we're going. And, you just think, oh, I'll pick it up it's just ibuprofen. It's just, it's just this migraine pill. It's just that, I only take it once a couple times a year. But what if it isn't there? And I think even little things, and I'll share an example. My mother who is not a person who has lots of allergies. She doesn't suffer from a peanut allergy or a dairy allergy, but she had an allergic reaction while she was traveling just a month ago. And it was one of those situations where we all kind of panicked a bit because she didn't speak the language. She was clearly having an allergic reaction to something, and she needed to get treatment. And so you think to yourself, well, of course, if I'm having some reaction, I can just take a Benadryl or I can just run to an urgent care. But what if this happens in a place where you don't know the where to go, or you don't speak the language, or you do not know if it is as simple as I just need to tell them my throat is closing up or I'm having this reaction. What do you do in situations like that?
Well, and Val, just to the point, and certainly turn it over to Kate on this one too. But you also have to be careful that some of you may have an illness. If someone has HIV positive and they take that type of medication into a country and they get searched, that could be a problem. That could be very problematic. And there are certain illnesses, unfortunately, in this world that it could be very problematic and it could jeopardize someone's safety in this sense. So there are things that you just got to have to be careful of on that side as well on that. So it's not only that's the other side of the component.
You're so right, Craig. I think that is such an interesting point, is that there are some medications that signal something, right? You might not need to seek them out while you're in country. You might come completely prepared. But a particular medication that you're on, perhaps it's birth control. Perhaps whatever that is, there are these medications that actually signal something that might not be legal in the country that you're going, that is completely standard in the country where you're from.
Yeah.
And how do you plan for that? Or at least, are you mindful of that? And I think that goes back to that research, is just acknowledging you might not think it's right, and it probably isn't right, but it is. And you have to research that. You have to know where you're going when you're going in. You need to know what about you as an individual might stand out, what might draw attention, and not in the way that you're looking to draw attention. And maybe that is something as simple as what medications you're packing in your bag. Maybe that's something as simple as what you're wearing. And I think that's another piece to all of it, is, I think for women in particular, sort of being prepared by what clothing you're allowed to wear. What part of your body needs to be covered in the place where you're traveling. And it's those things that, a lot of us take for granted. Sure, we kind of have our work uniform that we put on. I'll throw a dress on and go to this meeting, and I packed a few. But what if I need to cover my legs? And I did not realize that before stepping into another country? Those are the sort of things we have to be thinking about. What can you wear? What can't you wear? What is appropriate? What is inappropriate? What might not be legal? So, what do you bring and what shouldn't you bring?
Yeah, I think that dressing for the culture one, Val, is really important, and something you can research. It can lead to kind of the difference between getting off on the right foot and getting off on the wrong foot, and just taking that time, like you said, like what can't do, how, what behavior is acceptable, what behavior is not acceptable, what can I wear? Yes, in our cultures, we feel, very comfortable with our behaviors and what we wear and how we present ourselves. But maybe this isn't the norm where we are traveling to. And I think that little bit of extra preparation can pay dividends, when you're there. And it's all about, isn't it? It's the preparation piece and then the prevention piece. If I take the time to do the preparation before I go, then hopefully it will prevent me getting into certain situations when I'm there. And, no one wants a bad experience when you travel. Travel can be so enjoyable. It can bring so much, but one bad experience can be really upsetting. It can really change your outlook in many different ways. And as Craig and I said at the beginning, that preparation piece and just those little nuances can really make a difference.
Well, I think yes, to build on that point, I also think that a simple mistake, something that you did not research, I'm kind of hung up a little bit, I think, on kind of like what you're wearing sort of thing, can actually put you in danger in a way that that's something that feels so benign where you are, can actually put you in danger. So it's even more than just kind of perhaps it's even more than having an upsetting experience or a less than culturally smooth experience, it can actually put you in a dangerous position. If you just didn't know, you could not wear a skirt of a certain length or whatever, where it is that you're going, or this medication that you brought is a flag somewhere. And I think that it again, going back to the importance of research, it's so important to utilize any of the tools that your organization has available. If you do have a travel risk management company that you use, if you do have an assistance organization, if you do whatever your organization uses, I mean, like, these are tools that are available to the travelers. And I also think it's important to talk about how you don't just do this 2 and 3 and 4 months before you go. You should be doing this all the way leading up until you get on a plane. I mean, for all we know, things like holidays, elections, protests, strikes, these things kind of happen on a dime. And it's hard to prepare for those 4 months in advance, right? So you have to really be keeping an eye on this, keeping an eye on current events all the way through to the time where you land in country. And while you're there, I mean, you could be staying in the most safe part of town and something happens next door that no one was anticipating. So it's all of those, it's that nuance that you can prepare. You'll never be prepared for everything, but the more you prepare, the more you will be in front of. And you'll be thinking about it. That's the other thing, is if you're thinking about it, you're going to make better decisions, because at least you've entertained these ideas in your mind.
Well, and Val, to your point, when you mentioned security and safety and preparing, even sometimes the littlest things as well. You told the story a while ago when we were talking about this, is when a woman goes to check into a hotel room, is the person there checking them in announcing what room number you're staying in, right? Because there could be serious, you don't know who's behind you, right? And who's listening to that. And if they're announcing you're in room whatever, it's those little things that could be a real safety concern to someone traveling by themselves in that situation. So, and that's just such a minute thing. But you brought that up to me, and I was like, gosh, right? Because I don't necessarily, shame on me, I don't necessarily think about that. I don't necessarily, when I travel and the person says you're in room whatever, I didn't think about it. But it is very much of it could be a safety concern.
Well, and I have to say, so just to kind of give a little bit of insight into that story, Craig, the story we're talking about was, I was checking in. I was in London. I was in a perfectly safe place. And I was checking into a small hotel, and there were 2 gentlemen behind me speaking in a language I don't speak. And all I heard was recognized when I took my passport out was American. So clearly, I don't know that they had any malicious intent. I'm not going to jump to that, but they clearly were paying attention to something, right? So in that situation, when the gentleman behind the desk announced, Valerie, you'll be in room 315, it just, knowing that there was someone who was paying attention in the background, it kind of got my spidey senses tingling a little bit. And I think that maybe it's one of those situations where maybe it's my age, maybe it's the fact that I've been dealing with travel risk for a couple decades now. I felt empowered to take a breath and say to the person behind the desk, you need to put me in another room, and you can't announce it. But I think that maybe, and we are now dealing with a new generation of travelers who, we're always seeing new people entering the workforce. And I think that there are a lot of women, and I'm going to specifically say this about women because, Craig, to your point, as a man, you never thought about it. Usually you don't ever have to clock moments like that. But I think for younger women, maybe they don't feel empowered, whether it be individually or by their organization, to make the decision that this doesn't feel safe to me, or something feels off to me, or I think we do that thing where we don't want to overreact, so we let things slide. And it's okay to maybe overreact a little bit, in a way, even if there's nothing, there's no bad intention. right? Just maybe get in front of your own security a little bit.
And I think from a guy perspective, we have mothers, we have potentially wives, daughters, sisters. Like, we need to get the message out too, because sometimes people just may not think about that. And it's just those little safety tips that we can play our own part in spreading this out there, because sometimes it's things that you don't even think about that really could make the difference for someone's safety.
Yeah, and I think to both your points, that trusting your instinct. So if something doesn't feel quite right or feels off, then it's okay to acknowledge that to yourself and do something about it. And maybe, you can take the key and then go back. If you haven't had the confidence to react immediately, it doesn't mean to say that you can't go back and say something. Or, you get in a taxi and you kind of concerned that, sometimes I put the map on an app and try and follow along, especially if I don't really know where I'm going, or feel that something's off. It's okay to acknowledge that. And I think, like say, the majority of the time things generally are okay, but if your gut is telling you that this isn't quite right, then do something. Take action, be proactive. And in everyone's comfort level, to Val's point, is different, but taking a stance and doing something positive when your gut is telling you that this isn't quite right is really important. And it's a strength, it's not a weakness. And and maybe you ask the taxi driver to stop, or you ask them why, and they have a logical explanation. That's okay. That's not doing something wrong. That's just being proactive.
And I think as women, we should start to feel really comfortable using these tips and tricks. Like what Kate, you said it, when you get in, even though it's already plugged into the Uber address, plug it into your phone. So if you find yourself going west when you should be going east, you notice it. The other thing is, even if it's something as simple as calling someone, calling a man in your life and putting him on speakerphone, right? Hey, I'm headed to my meeting, or I'm headed to, just so that someone knows that someone out there in the world is aware that you are there. And I know it's probably too much, but it's actually probably not. Just announce, hey, yeah, I just got in my Uber. The license plate is so and so is the driver. Say the words out loud and say them to someone. Whether it's a real call or not, make it clear that you might be alone in the car, but you are not alone in the globe, right? There is someone who is concerned about your whereabouts, and you have shared your location and who you are with someone. Whomever it is on the other line, nobody needs to know. And I think that we need to get over the feeling of, will it be insulting to the driver? Will it be insulting to this other person? It's about you staying safe. And if there's no malintent, there's really nothing insulting about it. It just seems like any other conversation. But if there is something to be concerned about, you're proactively announcing, hey, I know where we're going, and I've shared with someone else where we're going as well. So it's all these small things that we could and should be doing just as part of our processes as we're traveling. And this is not just while we're traveling. This is, if you're a woman getting into an Uber, in Los Angeles, in my backyard, I should be doing this. I should be making it clear to someone that someone has their eye on where I'm going. I thought, Kate, you had brought something up as sort of while we were kind of preparing for this, as we were talking about it. And you had asked, okay, like, what are the 3 things that you would bring to each of us? And I just was kind of noodling on it. And I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about, like, from a safety perspective, from a security perspective, from an individual risk profile perspective, what are the things that each of us think are the important items we would bring? If we could only bring 3 things to keep ourselves safe, what would they be?
Okay, I'll kick it off. So people who work in travel risk, this is kind of very common, and something we all talk about, but our travel doorstop. I don't travel without it. It is like a security blanket having it at the bottom of my suitcase. But it's a good one. If someone tries to get into your room, you can put a chair under doors as well. But for me, it's just part of preparation. The other thing is your first aid kit. So it varies for me. It varies on where I'm traveling to. So like I said before, where you're going, but when you're doing your research, can kind of help you identify the level of risk. So for some journeys, it's just band-aids and, like you say, common ailments. Your headache tablets and things like that. But don't underestimate the value of having some key pieces in your first aid kit when you're traveling. And that preparation piece, again, will get you out of a number of fixes. Even things like, insect bites. They can be so miserable if you are bitten a lot and you've got these itchy, awful bites, and if you've got antihistamine and some ointment with you, it can really transform a night's sleep. And I think, not having to go out and find those things can really take a layer of stress. And then the other thing is having those key contacts, so sharing your trip with people that care about you. So one is work, but others are loved ones, so that they know where you are, and then having their contacts with you so you can check in and arrange some check-ins, so that when people are looking forward to hearing from you, but you've got responsibility to yourself to do that, so other people know you're okay.
And I 100% agree with everything she said. I'll take this in a slightly different light, just to give our listeners out there lots of different options. I would say especially if you're going to a country that you maybe never have been to before, or may not, it just has maybe different standards of living, whatever, you can register with the U.S. Embassy. Or if you're a UK citizen, you can register with the UK Embassy, right? They will keep track of you, and I have done this before, and you get notifications. Or if there's a natural disaster or something like that, they know you're there. So, registering with the embassy really can be very helpful. At least you got someone there. In this case, I'm talking for the US perspective here, but if you register with the US Embassy in whatever country you're going to, they have a track of where you're going to be. They know how long you're going to be there. If there are emergencies, if there's a volcano happening or something like that, they give you the notifications, and they can track your safety, right? And they can work on getting evacuations or something like that. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, on the same kind of token, because of the job I'm in too, keep a photocopy of your passport. Things happen. I get lots of times people call and say, I've lost my passport, or my passport was stolen. What can I do? If you have a copy of it, at least when you go, and again, I'm being US-centric, but if you go to the US Embassy to get a new passport, it's a lot easier to have it right there. So I always try to keep a copy of my passport with me too. And the other thing, not to put a plug out there for, but travel insurance isn't necessarily a bad thing to have. Things happen, right? And it can be very expensive if something happens, especially if you're on vacation, right? So sometimes if you're on business travel, the company will take care of it. But if you have a situation where you need to have your appendix removed or something, like things just happen, right? It can be, and you're on vacation, it can be very expensive, and your insurance may not cover you if you're out of the country. So especially if you're just on a leisure trip or something like that, make sure that think about taking those items as well.
It's so funny. Clearly, we think a lot alike, because my three items are sort of a blend of the same. Kate, I could not agree more with the doorstop. That how many, and anyone who's listening, how many conferences have we been to where people would hand out those doorstops, and you're like, what in the world? When you first start going, you're like, why? And you realize, oh, this might be the most important 1 ounce thing that I throw into my bag for any hotel room, because you just don't know where you're staying. You don't know what the lock situation. So I could not agree more. Same with the first aid, and for me, that kind of first aid kit might just be Band-Aids. It might just be, something to take for my lactose intolerance. It could just little things like that. But in there, I also always want to make sure that I have a copy of any kind of important medical anything, whether it be my insurance card or anything. But as a woman, I cannot stress the importance of a secure crossbody bag. To me, that is probably the most important thing, because how you want to be hands-free, or you might need to be hands-free. You don't want to be thinking of, where did I set my bag down? You want to be able to have dinner, you want to be able to go to meetings, you want to be able, just something that goes over your whole body that keeps all of these important things that you've brought with you safe and secure. So to me, I probably have like 8 of them that I sort of rotate through, but when I find a good one, it's critical. Something that just kind of keeps you safe and your belongings safe and kind of secure on your body. So I kind of feel like all of these things are an amalgamation of exactly what you two just said, as well. There's kind of important things to bring with you on any given trip. And I think that kind of as we're sort of rolling along, one of the things that I think is so important is that sort of element of staying connected, right? And again, all of these things kind of stretch through the entire trip. That research starts early and it continues up to the trip and through the trip, right? Your preparation starts before the trip and through the trip. And I think, but once you're there and you've landed and you're kind of going about your business, that sort of staying connected is so important. And that is personally and professionally. I think a lot of people travel so much that we get a little lax on this, and we'll say things, I'll text you when I land, or and then maybe things get a little hectic and you're trying to rush out because you just want to get in a cab because you're tired of being on a plane all day. But we all should have someone in our personal life and in our professional life who we are connecting with at various stages of our trip. And it doesn't matter if you get off that plane and you're exhausted, just tell someone you're there, and absolutely connect when you're checked into your hotel. Or you get in the cab. Maybe that's your moment to announce to the cab driver, hey, someone knows I'm here. But I think that's really important. And I think it's something that probably all of our organizations build into your travel prep. Right, is how to stay connected. And I'm sure, and I will kind of ask the two of you, I know you probably counsel a lot of organizations about what their organizational policy is for staying connected. Is that something that, at both CIBT and at International SOS, that's sort of some guidance that you give your clients as well, about, what is your organization's policy about staying connected? Do they know who to be in touch with?
Yeah, I certainly say on the business trips that I've taken as well, I'm always in contact with the people there. They know when from a company perspective, they know where I'm going. They know a lot of what my plans are for the trip. So there's a lot of that. And then it's just being in constant contact, to your point of, they know where I am at most times of the day, not in a scary way, but in a good way, so that they know. So I feel that I have that comfort level of knowing where they are. And I think, that goes across the board within the organization.
Yeah, and I think to Craig's point, for depending on kind of the risk profile of the country, will depend on how many layers of contact we will build in, or suggest that someone has. So it's maybe like Val, you said, when you land, and then there's certain parts throughout the trip where you check in. But as the risk profile of a trip increases, maybe the countries, then there will be specific needs for people to call in at specific times, and and action plans in place should they miss a time. So there's a scale, and for each trip that will be done on an individual basis. But I think it's important to look at the profile of the trip, and then put those measures in place to ensure their safety, a person's safety throughout.
Well, I also think this is and should be teachable. We kind of tend to look at this as business travelers who've been doing this for a while. But again, going back to something we talked about earlier, every year there's a new sort of generation and new staff members coming in. So I think the teachable part is empowering them. First of all, this is the expectation. The expectation is that you will check in. And the other side to this is, how can we contact you? If something happens in location and I just need to know that you are safe and not around this incident that's happening, how do we get in touch with you quickly? And it's not about, and Craig, I think you were kind of alluding to it, and I just want to kind of scratch it a little deeper. It's not a big brother thing. It's not about that whole like creepy feeling of my company needs to know what I'm doing all the time. It's not that. It's that if something happens, how can we get in touch with you just to make sure you're okay? We don't want to know what you had for dinner. We don't want to know who you ate dinner with. We just want to make sure that if that restaurant is next door to a place where there was an incident, we know you're safe afterward and you're secure in your room, or in your meeting or wherever you're going next. And I think that these are just teachable things that we can kind of share with, as a travel manager, as an assistance organization, as wherever seat you sit in, kind of sharing the importance of just staying connected and sharing this information and feeling empowered. If you get to a hotel and it doesn't feel safe, or it is really not what it looked like online, does your organization support you to say, I'm not staying here, this place looks a little sketchy?
And not only that, but it's also to making sure that like you know that the company has your back, right?
Yep.
And just to even say like, look, if you don't feel safe in this area, you can change, right? I think lots of us probably use the company. We have certain criteria that we have to do when we book a hotel or things like that. But sometimes pictures don't always tell the truth until you get to that location. And it's also knowing to make sure you convey it to your travelers that, look, if you don't feel safe in that hotel, you can change, right? Because it's your safety. And travel is so personal, and it's so much about you being safe, and especially women. This is about women, right? But it's knowing that you have the confidence and your company has the confidence to have your back on this.
And I think there's so much to it about building that relationship. And I'll kind of put this on a travel manager, right? Is kind of creating that safe space for these conversations and having that opportunity to debrief on things and talk about them when they happen. Just positioning yourself. And I think it is, and I will say this particularly for women, but it also for other demographics that might not have just sort of carte blanche around the globe, who are safe everywhere. There are certain people who are just safe everywhere, and there are other people who aren't. And to be able to have that trust that people can kind of talk to you about these things. And I think just building that trust and that understanding that your organization does in fact have your back. And we're not looking for the details of your life. We're not asking you, no one's asking you to share confidential information. It's really just about, look, if something is worrisome to you while you're traveling, let's talk about it. I don't need to know the why. I just need to know the what. And how can we help you? Maybe that means maybe you had a situation where you just arrived a little too late at night in a country and it just wasn't the safest place for you. Maybe that means we have to have a conversation, and maybe it costs a few more dollars, but it gets you in at a more reasonable time for your safety.
Yeah. Val, as we kind of summarized here, and Kate, do you have any words of wisdom as we wrap up kind of this discussion here today on women's health?
Well,
any key items to maybe like stress?
Yeah, I would say, okay, I'm kind of jumping on exactly what we talked about earlier, but it's trust your gut. I mean, of course, do all the things, right? Do your research, be prepared, have these conversations, but like in the moment, trust your gut. And if something doesn't feel right, just do something about it, whether you're able to do it in the moment or whether you have to adjust your plan, whether you have to make a plan B, right? Do something about it, because it could be the difference between you staying safe and you finding yourself in a situation that you are already too far down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other thing I would say is, really try and look after your mental health. Stress when traveling is a real extra burden and added layer. And simple things like getting enough sleep, eating well, not possible all the time, but an early night every so often, and all of those things make such a difference when you're traveling. So, you know, look at ways to reduce your stress levels, look after your mental health, and travel safely.
I feel like we could probably talk about this for hours and hours and hours and hours.
Gosh, we've done well. I think we've done about 40 minutes, haven't we?
Right.
All right.
I think we have.
You've been listening to The Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. For more information about GBTA and its work, visit gbta.org. And be sure to rate and review us whenever you get your podcasts. Until next time, thanks for listening.